Stop everything and listen, because what just happened is shaking the world to its core. A U.S. military operation seizes a Venezuelan oil vessel, and in hours, China and Russia leap into action. Do you see what's happening? This isn't a story about politics. This is about power, control, and survival on a global scale. Your energy, your money, your future, it's all connected to this moment. You need to know this now because the old rules are breaking and new alliances are forming at lightning speed. If you think this is just news, think again. This is a wake-up call to understand who really runs the world, who can bend economies and who can't. Stick with me. And by the end of this report, you'll see the hidden moves, the global chessboard, and why this impacts everyone, everywhere. This military oil interception triggers immediate China-Russia coordination. This military oil interception triggers immediate China-Russia coordination as a Venezuelan flagged oil vessel operating under sanction conditions is stopped and effectively seized through American military pressure, a move that instantly reverberates through global energy corridors and sets off a rapid counterreaction from two of Washington's most capable geopolitical challengers. The interception is framed by us officials as enforcement, but in diplomatic channels and strategic capitals, it is read for what it is: a force-based intervention in energy flows designed to reassert control over a system that is no longer fully compliant. Within hours, Beijing and Moscow activate pre-existing contingency frameworks, accelerating coordination mechanisms that had been quietly built over years of sanctions warfare, trade restrictions, and dollar-based financial chokeholds. This is not a reactive scramble. This is execution. Communication lines open between Russian defense officials, Chinese energy planners, and Venezuelan state oil executives, focusing on immediate continuity of supply, alternative shipping routes, and financial settlement structures immune to US jurisdiction. The speed of alignment signals that the incident was anticipated, not improvised against. The oil vessel becomes the spark, not the cause, of a strategic response already waiting for activation. The interception itself highlights a critical shift in American strategy. When economic tools lose reach, military presence fills the gap. Sanctions alone no longer guarantee compliance, particularly as parallel payment systems, regional trade agreements, and bilateral barter mechanisms reduce exposure to us controlled infrastructure. By physically intervening in oil transport, Washington escalates the enforcement layer of its economic policy, turning abstract restrictions into tangible force. That escalation, however, carries costs. It transforms sanctions from a financial deterrent into a security risk, inviting countermeasures that move beyond diplomatic protest. China and Russia understand that once energy transport becomes militarized, the rules change for everyone. Their coordination is therefore not limited to Venezuela's immediate needs, but expands into broader operational planning, including escort arrangements, port access assurances, and intelligence, sharing on maritime movements across key choke points. Venezuela shifts from isolation to strategic energy alliance as the interception crystallizes a reality long building beneath the surface. The country is no longer a solitary target absorbing pressure in silence. For years, Venezuelan oil production and export capacity were throttled through asset freezes, shipping insurance bans, and secondary sanctions designed to scare off third-party buyers. The objective was economic attrition, forcing political change through sustained scarcity. What the latest episode reveals is that attrition has limits. When alternative patrons are willing to absorb risk in exchange for long-term leverage, China's involvement is rooted in energy security and debt recovery, with Venezuelan crude playing a role in Beijing's diversification away from Middle Eastern supply lines vulnerable to U.S. naval dominance. Russia's engagement is strategic and political, reinforcing its broader confrontation with Western sanctions regimes by demonstrating that isolation can be mitigated through alliance, building rather than capitulation. The transition from isolation to alliance is not symbolic. It is structural. Chinese state-linked firms move quickly to reassess logistics, redirecting shipments toward ports and refineries configured to handle Venezuelan grades, while bypassing traditional Western insurers and brokers. Russian entities, already accustomed to operating under sanctions, provide expertise in shadow fleet management, ship-to-ship transfers, and regulatory navigation in hostile jurisdictions. Venezuela, in turn, offers what it has always had, but struggled to monetize under pressure: vast reserves of heavy crude that remain economically viable when geopolitical risk is priced into long-term agreements rather than spot market transactions. The result is a triangular relationship in which risk is shared, reward is deferred, and control is redistributed. This alignment challenges a core assumption underlying U.S. sanctions policy: that isolation is sustainable if applied forcefully enough. The Venezuelan case now demonstrates the opposite. Isolation creates incentives for deeper integration with rival power centers, especially when those centers possess complementary needs and capabilities. China needs energy security and leverage in the Western Hemisphere. Russia needs partners willing to normalize sanctions evasion and demonstrate resilience against U.S. pressure. Venezuela needs buyers, protection, and financial channels that cannot be frozen overnight. The interception of the oil vessel compresses these interests into immediate action, accelerating timelines that might otherwise have unfolded over years. From a market perspective, the implications extend beyond the single shipment involved. Traders, insurers, and shipping firms observe the incident and reassess exposure, not just to Venezuelan oil, but to any cargo moving through contested regulatory space. The risk premium attached to U.S. enforcement actions rises, while the perceived reliability of alternative networks improves. This is how parallel systems gain credibility, not through declarations, but through demonstrated functionality under stress. China and Russia's swift coordination sends a message to other sanctioned or sanctioned vulnerable states that options exist, provided they are willing to trade transparency for continuity. The U.S. action also alters the internal calculus within Venezuela. Domestic narratives shift from survival under siege to participation in a broader geopolitical contest. This reframing strengthens the government's negotiating position at home and abroad, reducing incentives to concede under pressure, while increasing reliance on external allies who benefit from prolonged resistance. In this context, the oil vessel is not just cargo, it is proof of concept. It tests whether alliance commitments hold when challenged directly, and the response suggests they do. What emerges is a feedback loop that undermines the original enforcement objective. Military interception prompts alliance activation. Alliance activation reduces isolation. Reduced isolation weakens sanctions. Weakened sanctions encourage further defiance, which in turn invites more forceful enforcement. Each cycle escalates the stakes while diminishing returns for unilateral action. China and Russia, by coordinating early and visibly, aim to flatten this curve, signaling that future interceptions will carry higher strategic costs and diminishing tactical gains. The broader significance lies in how energy is once again positioned at the center of geopolitical power, not merely as a commodity, but as an organizing principle for alliances. Control over production, transport, financing, and security becomes the basis for influence, replacing the post-Cold War assumption that markets alone could depoliticize supply. The Venezuelan episode marks a repoliticization of energy flows, with military and economic instruments fused into a single continuum. In that environment, countries rich in resources, but poor in allies become liabilities, while those embedded in supportive networks gain resilience, regardless of domestic weakness. As China and Russia move from coordination to institutionalization, formalizing mechanisms that reduce reliance on Western-controlled systems, the immediate crisis surrounding the intercepted vessel recedes into a longer-term realignment. Venezuela's role shifts accordingly from sanctioned outlier to test case for a new model of sanctioned state integration. The speed with which this shift occurs underscores a central reality of the current global order. Power no longer waits for consensus, and alignment no longer requires ideological unity, only shared exposure to pressure and shared interest in neutralizing it. Oil seizure exposes cracks in U.S. economic dominance as the interception of a Venezuelan tanker reveals growing limits to Washington's ability to enforce compliance through financial pressure alone, forcing a visible shift toward hard power to achieve outcomes once delivered by sanctions and market access. The move signals to allies and rivals alike that traditional tools, dollar settlement control, insurance bans, and secondary sanctions are no longer universally effective, particularly as alternative trade channels proliferate. China accelerates non-dollar oil trade routes in direct response, expanding yuan, settled energy contracts, state-backed shipping insurance, and bilateral clearing systems designed to bypass us controlled financial infrastructure. These mechanisms, tested under pressure, gain legitimacy as real cargo continues to move, despite enforcement actions. The result is a recalibration of global energy trade, where resilience increasingly favors systems built outside Western oversight, weakening the deterrent power of economic dominance while normalizing parallel networks. Russia signals military backing for Venezuelan energy security as defense coordination and naval presence are elevated following the U.S. oil interception, indicating a readiness to deter future disruptions to sanctioned energy flows. The move reframes enforcement actions as potential security flashpoints rather than administrative measures. Sanctions lose force as global compliance fractures, with more states and firms calculating that alignment with alternative power blocks now carries manageable risk compared to full adherence to us. Led restrictions, accelerating the erosion of collective enforcement mechanisms. Energy control replaces diplomacy as primary weapon as states increasingly deploy access to oil, shipping lanes, and refining capacity to shape outcomes once managed through negotiation and treaties, hardening disputes into transactional power struggles. Multipolar power blocks harden across the global south as energy producers and importers cluster around protective alliances that offer continuity of supply and financial insulation, reducing reliance on Western-led systems and accelerating the fragmentation of the global order. Naval pressure replaces financial leverage in U.S. strategy as maritime enforcement and military presence are increasingly used to disrupt sanctioned energy movements, reflecting diminishing confidence in purely economic controls. The shift raises operational risks across key shipping corridors, prompting recalculations by commercial operators and insurers. Global oil markets brace for retaliatory realignment as producers, traders, and state buyers anticipate countermeasures that could redirect supply chains, alter pricing benchmarks, and accelerate the use of alternative settlement systems outside traditional Western frameworks. Here's the truth. The world you thought was steady. It's shifting right in front of your eyes. Military force is meeting economic power. Alliances are forming faster than governments can respond. And energy is now a weapon that touches every household, every wallet, every future. You can't afford to look away. You need to see the moves, understand the risks, and stay ahead. This is a moment to wake up, pay attention, and recognize that the global order isn't waiting. It's being rewritten. Stay alert, stay informed, and remember why this matters. This is USA World Reports, where we cut through the chaos to show you what's really happening and why it affects you. Thank you for being here. If this shook you, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe. Stay connected, stay alert, stay ahead. The next shift is already forming, and you need to see it first. Join us, stay informed, and be part of the conversation that actually matters.